Hello, my name is Mike, and this is the home of guns and horsepower. Thank you for joining me for today's video, where I upgrade the suspension on my 1997 Ford Mustang Cobra. Now I'm going with KYB AGX adjustable struts in the front and non-adjustable KYB gas adjust shocks in the rear. Now they state that the rear shocks are 25% stiffer than stock and perfect if you're putting lowering springs on the car, which I'm also doing today. I'm installing an IBOC Pro Kit. Lowers the car about 1.25 inches. I definitely want to take care of this stance. Way too high. And plus this car is a little bit over 25 years old now and the shocks are gone. It's really bouncy. So it's time to upgrade the suspension and get this thing handled properly. There we go. Getting the quad shock first. And then to release the shock, I gotta go up inside the trunk. As you can see, this thing is shot. I pressed it all the way down and it's not pushing back at all. Completely wasted. Now to get to the nut on the top of the rear shock, you're gonna have to remove this liner just to make it easier on yourself. Fox body Mustang is definitely a lot easier. It was a hard plastic cover with a little top that popped off and gave you access right to it. So far for the rear, the hardest part's been getting to that nut for the top of the shock. So here's a setup I found out that works the best to get that rear shock off. You start turning that nut on there, it just spins the shaft. The top has little slats cut in the sides, but nothing fits it, no wrench, no socket, nothing goes on there. And using just an adjustable wrench, it kept slipping. So I went ahead and got the vice grip, held it tight, and this seems to be working just fine. There is nothing holding that in. Since there's nothing holding the axle, we simply just need to lower this. Guess I probably could have used the compressor, spring compressor on it, but it wasn't too bad. The new one's shorter, so we won't have any issues putting that in. Stock spring on the right, new lower IBOC spring on the left. When I got the new spring in, all I had to do was just pretty much remove the shocks, lower down. I have a jack supporting the axle, drop it down, and the old spring popped right back out. The new one's shorter, so it was easier to put back in. Just got to make sure you have the car jacked up high enough so the control arm hangs down. With the new springs in, now we're going to go ahead and install the shocks. Nut locks itself down when there's no more threads and we're good. Now we're going to install the shock on the bottom end, and with that we're going to jack up and move up the axle. So the issue we're having is this is not wide enough to fit the shock. It must have got compressed a little bit. I'm tightening the old one. I just need to open it up a hair. I think that should do it. There we go. And got a 18 millimeter on the bottom and a 15 on the back. Now, one of the things with the quad shock, there are going to be these spacers that come with it. They're two different sizes, and they're basically to move the shock away so it doesn't rub against the normal shock. So we got the thicker spacer at the top. Go ahead and slide the shock on here first, because if you mount it on the bottom end first, you won't be able to get it up over this. So this has to go on first. I'm not going to tighten anything. Now we got to move on to the bottom mount, which honestly is the trickiest part of probably this whole process, because once you're installing the new quad shock, it is extremely stiff and hard to compress. So, and get the bolt with the spacer in there all at once. But like I said, I've done this before. So the spacer is going to go on this side because we're trying to move it away from the shock. Like I said, the absolute hardest part of this job is to compress this sucker. And you got to make sure you got the tension off so you don't cross thread. All right, it's in. Well, there you have it. Everything is installed, and the reason for the spacers with the quad shock, I don't know if you can see that there. See how close they are? The original quad shock, this is just a skinny little shaft. So this one, being a lot thicker, has to move away so it doesn't interfere with the other shock. So that's why we have the spacers pushing it to the one side up there, but everything's in, and it should make a huge difference, because the original quad shock had absolutely no resistance pushing back, and same with the shock. Once you closed it, it just stayed there. New shock, quad shock, and lowering spring. Alright, so here's a little tip. Before you completely remove the strut, leave one end bolted so you can you'll be able to torque off the caliper bolts, because you're going to need to remove the caliper to get more clearance, because of this hose is an issue. But this car, these bolts have been on here for 25 years. I need all the leverage I could get. So before you disconnect all the bolts for the strut, leave it on so the brake doesn't pivot side to side, and you'll be able to torque to get those off. I cheated, I broke these free off camera. It's like I couldn't get up in there to get the torque I needed with the camera on. They're not going to be that easy, believe me. See how this wants to move? So if you take your strut off too soon, you won't have anything to torque on. So as you can see, that line is stressed, and so that's why we have to take this off. And luckily we got a nice little shelf up here that it sits in down perfectly. There we go. Store that there. You're definitely going to need to remove this too. Get a little bit more slack out of this line. There we go. We're going to need to remove the steering arm as well, because we're going to have to drop this all the way down. Do not lose this. It's a pretty unique size for the 97 Mustang. Used our little pry tool. Pop this off. I'm going to go ahead and leave it in place so this isn't flopping around. We need to detach the swing arm so the control arm will be able to drop all the way down to get the spring out. So one part left to go. Sorry, I forgot to hit record when I popped this out, but pretty simple. This goes on. The clamp presses until it releases and it just pops. Like I said, I'm going to leave that attached. I'm going to put the nut so the threads don't get damaged while I'm working with the swing arm. There we go. So here's how you get the swing arm off. On the very bottom underneath the control arm here, it looks like a washer, but there's two sides that are square. And no socket I can find fits it, so I just do the vice grips. You turn it, the vice grips will lock kind of against this, and then you can go ahead and start getting this bad boy off. Now this is different than the Fox body. The Fox body had a nut on the bottom and it was simpler. This one took a little bit to figure out. You're going to want to make sure the control arm is supported with the jack, because once we let this go, there's nothing holding this together and the spring is going to drop it. So to control that drop, get a jack on the bottom there. Everything down here is metric except for this. The sway bar mount is standard 9/16. Are we there yet? So that's what I was referring to. Looks like a washer, but it's squared off on the edges. And the only thing I could find that works good is the vice grip. Now that's all that's left is to lower it down. Go slow. So as you can see, the spring is almost out. It's going to take a little bit of muscle to get it out. I tried a spring compressor on this. It just didn't work. And it doesn't fit up in here like it did on the Fox body. This opening is much smaller. The ones on the side get in the way over here. If you were going to be putting the stock springs back in, you're definitely going to need a compressor, but since we're putting lowering springs, they're shorter, it's not going to be a problem. Normally you'd have to worry about the spring tension, but it's almost all the way expanded. So there's not going to be a lot of force popping out once we get it out. It's really just that rubber piece that's kind of holding it in place at this moment. There we go. A bit more tension than expected. Well, here we have the on the right and the Eibach. I think it's supposed to lower it about 1.25 inches. So as you can see, that should make the reinstallation a bit easier because it's not as tall. There it is. Let go. Really what makes it hard is it's rubber sliding on metal. Yeah. It takes so much force. All right, well now that's up. Can you hold this up for me like that so it's out of the way? This plate keeps getting caught on my jack. Now I'll go ahead and apply some tension. Just limits our pump. All right, that's all I needed help for. That's the one part, and you need two hands. Thank you, Hayden. Okay, go ahead and get that nut back on there. Almost. As I lower the car, it's going to bring the control arm up. I just need this to go center.
Okay.
But see, these things, if I let go, they fall apart. Okay, once it's in the hole, you can let go.
Okay.
Okay. As you can see, this one's green. The top one was smushed. I had some spares. Go ahead and change out that one. The rest of them are fine. Looks like it got smushed from factory. I over tightened it or something. Should be good. Oh, those shocks are stiff. We're good. Make sure everything's good up there. Looks good. Okay. There we go. I don't know the exact torque specs, but basically as tight as you can get it. You should be kind of pinching the shock mount just a tad. Caliper bolts, tie rod, sway bar mount, everything is good up top, up down here. One last bolt to go. Now the only way you're going to be able to get this on is with an impact wrench, because it's going to spin the shaft. As you can see, I'll show you here if I don't lose the nut. It's got these flat sides to put a wrench on, but the nut covers them up. And it doesn't have a Allen in the top because that's the adjuster. So the only way, because this is going to spin it faster than it spins the shaft.
Now the shavings are coming up from the plastic from the nut.
That's it. fixed, and the suspension's nice and tight now. And those old shocks were really blown out. The car looks much better and no more massive fender gap. And now the handling is the way it's supposed to be, the way it should have came from factory, especially for a Cobra. Now it lives up to its name. Definitely well worth the time and money invested. The car's handling is greatly improved and absolutely perfect for the street. I don't get any bump steer, it's not too rough, absolutely perfect. Well, thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you found the information useful and informative. Please browse my channel for my other content, give me a like, and smash that subscribe button. Thanks again for watching.